Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Vicki, very much for your hospitality in this storied room. It's really a pleasure to be here. I love Eau Claire and what you're doing. I wrote the recent piece in the St. Paul Pioneer Press about Eau Claire, and that is the beginning of a lot of other work. This book, which is stories from around the world for 30 years of what we call public work, I'll describe that, culminates with Eau Claire for a reason, which I'll talk about. So it's really great to be here. I'm going to give some background, and then I'm going to read a bit from the book. Okay. My wife, Mari Strom, who is a co-author of 2 of the chapters in the book and adapted what we call public work. Well, just let me give a brief definition. Public work is a simple concept, but it's eroded in our public life. It's citizenship understood as collaborative work with public purpose aiming at public impact. Sounds pretty simple and down to earth and reasonable, right? But it's really eroded. We've seen a lot of erosion of our capacities to work together in collaborative ways across our differences. And I would say a great tragedy that's connected to that is the loss of public purpose in our work. I mean, if you think of any institution, for example, businesses across Minnesota and across the country used to have a strong civic purpose. They weren't simply money-making machines. Not some were, but many really had a root in a community. The founding vision of education in America, of all the founders of the country, saw education's most important purpose was developing citizens. Out of the wise observation that citizens are not born, they're developed. So I could go on and on about the loss of public purpose in many settings. Everything is now kind of focused narrowly on a goal which is not really discussed very much, like teaching to the test or making a lot of money, or in elections, winning at any cost, often by demonizing the opposition. Sports, winning is the only thing, as Lombardi said. So we've really lost a larger sense of purpose in a lot of spheres of American society. So public work is about bringing back purpose as well as collaboration and the ability to work together. And serious, down-to-earth, practical problem solving and getting things done and building a community. So why covenant? And what in the world does it mean, and it's in my St. Paul Pioneer Press article, to say, Eau Claire, in my view, is growing a new civic covenant that's relevant to the country. That's what I want to talk about. I've been thinking a lot about covenant in recent times, really since November, because Mari, my South African wife, became a U.S. citizen in a naturalization ceremony called Celebration of Citizenship. And interestingly, it was not a narrow definition of citizenship. The presiding judge sounded like the great Hull House leader, Jane Addams, who welcomed immigrants with all their different talents into the American democracy, understood as an evolving, open society. And she said, get involved, whatever you do, get involved and bring your culture and your history and your ideals. Just the reverse of the idea of the melting pot where everybody's supposed to become the same. There was a whole series of songs, Woody Guthrie songs, like This Land Is Your Land, America the Beautiful, the choral group from the St. Paul and singing My Country 'Tis of Thee. And they gave out to every naturalized citizen. By the way, in this ceremony, there were 1,015 people naturalized from 93 countries. Amazing. In St. Paul, in the River Center, on the bank of the Mississippi in November. So everyone got something called a citizen almanac. which had, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, but it had several documents that I thought could be called civic covenants, kind of defining documents or statements at different periods of an American history. Before the country, there was the Mayflower Compact, where the Pilgrims covenanted to work together and be responsible for each other. Thanks for coming. Pleasure to see you. There was the Declaration of Independence, really one of the great documents of egalitarian freedom in the world, used by countries all around the world, including newly independent countries or countries struggling for independence. And there was, of direct interest to me in my own history, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. I worked for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference as a young man. My dad was on the executive committee of King's organization. And I heard King practice I Have a Dream from my father's hotel room in Washington, D.C., just before the March on Washington, early in the morning. I have a dream. He was seeing how it sounded. But that was a declaration, and the whole march, in a way, was a civic covenant. It was a call for Americans to live up to the ideals of inclusion and equality. So I think we need another civic covenant. I would say, using different understandings, that civic covenant means especially, this is the biblical term, a shared agreement, often written, but not always, to live and work together in peace. Not to put aside disagreements or conflicts, but to live in peace and to figure out how to work together. So it's building a common life together. And the second meaning of covenant is a shared story of who we are as a people. I thought the celebration of citizenship was doing a marvelous job of recalling that we had once a celebration of common citizenship that was far broader and more multidimensional than simply legal status. So all sorts of people who were not legal immigrants but who were living here could participate in a larger citizenship. I also learned that in the Civil Rights Movement, in the citizenship schools of the Civil Rights Movement. So I think we're in a crisis today because we've seen an erosion of the civic covenant. And the documents, in a way, felt like relics from the past in that Citizen Almanac. So I think there are three contributing factors that operate powerfully to erode our civic covenant. And all of these Eau Claire, what I'll call the civic movement, which includes clear vision, but it's also broader than clear vision. I was talking to Tom Gaffey today about the musical scene, for example, all the different creative energies that have been unleashed in the last decade or so. But the civic movement in Eau Claire that I think is beginning to, I'm not going to idealize it, but I think it's beginning to show serious work in addressing these crises that are huge crises in America. They are not only in America, too. These are global. These are the contributors I want to lift up today. One, a kind of fraying of social relationships, what the Harvard scholar Robert Putnam called bowling alone. More and more people are bowling, but people are bowling alone. They've stopped joining leagues. There's an erosion in civic organizations of all kinds, and that's also accompanied by a growing social isolation. So the evidence is that over the last 20 years, people's social networks have shrunk by about 50%. And social media, which has possibilities for contributing to connection, often displaces real relationships with friending on Facebook. So ironically and tragically, young people who are the denizens of the social media world are often the loneliest. So that's seeing social media and the technologies of today as substitutes for, rather than supplements to human relationships. Secondly, there's a loss of civic muscle. People feel powerless. And that's partly that we've seen the erosion of a lot of community sites that I saw across the South in the Civil Rights Movement, like beauty parlors, which were civic centers in the life of communities, or the churches, which were community institutions. They weren't isolated theological bubbles, or schools, and businesses of different kinds, and sometimes universities, and sometimes government agencies, like the Extension Service in the black communities, which were often quite active. So that's a dimension of the loss of civic muscle. I think another one is that we are increasingly fragmented and polarized. So tragically, about 85 to 90% of Democrats have a very bad view of Republicans, and it's exactly the same on the other side. And 40% of Americans now do not want their kids to marry somebody of another party. Now, these figures are from a movement called Better Angels, which I want to reference its website. It's in the book, which is doing something about it. And it's found actually that serious conversation and work so that people learn to listen to each other and think about themselves, hi, come on in, can overcome that. People actually don't want to be in warring camps. Not only that, the Better Angels, they did a manifesto, a kind of statement, a declaration last June of equal numbers of red and blue Republicans and Democrats from all across the country, every state. They came together and made a statement of what they were about. And they all agreed, after working on, making connections, they're not trying to convince each other, they're just recognizing that we have a common stake, usually in towns and cities about like Eau Claire. Their declaration was based on the idea that our hostilities towards each other are significantly manufactured. They're whipped up. We've been manipulated by the media, by the cable news, by talk radio, by the internet. So there was a very strong sense, and these were ordinary folks from all across the country, and kind of naming what a lot of people feel, that the new digital revolution can really put us at odds. And I would say that contributes dramatically to powerlessness and loss of civic muscle. And then the third thing is a kind of drift. I mean, who are we as a society? We have all these different frameworks. There's liberal and conservative and red and blue, and is it even imaginable that we would repair a sense that we have a common fate? A we, not a me, and not an us versus them. A politics in which we don't see our opponents as evil and enemies. So it's a politics that goes beyond the us versus them language and framework that dominates today. So those are all crises. And tragically, they're not simply here in the United States, they're all around the world. In fact, Barack Obama, after he left office, has created a foundation aimed at addressing all these three things. That's the mission of the foundation. It's not electoral politics, it's not governmental programming and engineering, it's actually how do we repair a sense of civic connection. So, I want to explain why I think Eau Claire is making a little progress. I don't think you've solved all the problems, but I think you're making progress on each one of these things. So the drift is a loss of a sense of story, of common images and symbols and themes, even the Declaration of Independence or the Mayflower Compact, or even Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. I don't think most people read them. They don't think about them as our history that we share. So I want to begin with the way Clear Vision and Eau Claire, the civic movement, rose out of the story of Eau Claire. And then I'll come back to the way I think it deepens and begins to turn it into a civic covenant. I'll call it a Nehemiah story. This is from chapter 9. called a democratic awakening. And I use here the idea that from Extension Service, everyone know Extension? It's the cooperative extension. There's a great tradition in Extension that the best way to create a kind of dissemination of really exciting, important, powerful ideas and practices is not to preach about them or not to have them in a lecture, but actually to have people come to see them. It's called the demonstration plot model. And it seems to me that one of the challenges and the possibilities is for us to think about how Eau Claire could become a demonstration site. Not prettifying it, but as a place that people come and learn from and interact with and contribute to. We've seen in our own work that work with our youth initiative called Public Achievement, which is extensively described in how it started in school in St. Paul. Principal was Dennis Donovan. Became the spirit of the school. These little kids in a low-income school learned to do remarkable things, thinking of themselves as citizens doing public work, like build a playground and turn around neighborhood opinion that thought it was going to be too dangerous. And I could go on and on about the stories, and it did spread around the world. But actually, St. Paul's St. Bernard School in Rice neighborhood, a low-income neighborhood in St. Paul, was a demonstration site. People came from all around the world because the kids had such poise and confidence and honesty. If they didn't know something, they would say it, and they'd talk about their setbacks and mistakes. So anyway, I think Eau Claire could be a demonstration plot, and we're talking and strategizing today about how that could happen. That's worth talking about, Vicki. This is from the book. Public work is best understood through the histories out of which it emerges and on which it builds. Eau Claire has a fruitful history. In this regard, the community history has been marked by often bitter conflicts, but also by patterns of collaboration from the very beginning. I go on and talk about the complex and fraught relations with the Indians, but the fact that the native peoples also were able to stay in that area, unlike most places in the Midwest. What did I say? Ethnic segregation featured prominently in Eau Claire's history. In 1900, 6 foreign language newspapers were published in the valley. 5 in German. And this is a quote from an exhibit in Chippewa Valley Museum. And I realized part of the depth of Eau Claire when Mari and I came with our sister, or her sister, my sister-in-law from South Africa to visit about a year ago. We went to the Chippewa Valley Museum, and I thought, I knew about the accomplishments, but I thought, boy, there is also a story here. It's a wonderful museum. Actually, one of the best museums I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And it's an ongoing living museum that makes the history come alive, and it's continuing, and it's open, and it doesn't prettify the history. There are all sorts of sordid chapters, like the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, aimed at Catholics and Germans. But there are also really strong stories of collaboration. So if Eau Claire had conflicts, it featured many kinds of public work that built connections and taught people how to work together to address problems. The community was at the center of cooperatives, a real cooperative center of helping each other out in farming, of trade union organizing, of businesses that work together. It was full of practices like barn raising and quilting bees and voluntary fire departments, and civic groups consciously aimed at bridging the ethnic divides and divisions. All of that is really featured in the Chippewa Valley Museum. And then there was a kind of pattern of collaboration that was part of the DNA of Eau Claire. Carrie Kincaid, who was the president of the city council, described the city council model of city manager as prompting collaboration. It's a more flat structure. And the city and county health departments are the first in the state to have a joint management and structure of expenses and services and a director. So there's a lot of shared collaborative history to build on, as well as conflicts and divisions to overcome. And I think that's the foundation of the clear vision and the civic movement in the last decade or so. Secondly, distinctively, Clear Vision has developed a model of working and developing which is focused on civic capacity building, which is just another way of saying building civic muscle through collaborative work with public purpose. Civic muscle. That's what we've lost in communities. That's why people feel like we don't know how to address our problems. People look to government, they look to experts, but we've tended to lose the habit of looking to ourselves and each other and mutual work together. But a kind of civic muscle building vision was woven into the fabric of Clear Vision from the beginning. We had worked with Mike Huggins in a project on teenage drinking in the mid-90s when he was assistant manager, city manager, in which we were actually in a fight with the Department of Epidemiology, which had contracted with us to employ a community organizing approach for addressing teenage drinking in 8 communities, including Eau Claire and Toma and 2 other communities in Wisconsin. And in their view, which is pretty common, they didn't really mean community organizing, at least not, or civic organizing as we mean it. They meant they knew what they wanted communities to do, and they wanted us to get them to do it. So they wanted communities to pass very strict carding legislation. And we said, well, you can find somebody to do that, but that's not what we do. If communities develop capacity, they work together, they figure out how to define the problem through a kind of mix and argument and different points of view, and then they figure out what they're going to do about it. So Mike was interested in that approach and saw some parallels with the city managers. It's difficult in my experience to get city managers even to acknowledge power relations. He said, as managers, we are uncomfortable talking about power. What it is, who has it, how to build it, how to use it. He said, city managers, like epidemiologists, are trained to be the problem solvers and have the answers. Yet for all the challenges, he also believes local government needs a paradigm shift, a vision for local democracy in the 21st century centered on citizens. So the very beginning of Clear Vision came about when there was budget shortfalls, and he helped organize a meeting of city government people and nonprofit leaders and said, let's do something different. Let's actually think of the whole community as a resource for addressing our problems rather than cut services or scrape by. So something that is almost unique in the field of community development, and I know this field well, is the way from the very beginning there were many stakeholders involved. It wasn't driven by any one sector. It wasn't driven by local government or the business community or higher education. Those are the 3 major forces that usually drive community projects. The group secured an initial $40,000 from a range of partners, including the city, the county, Chamber of Commerce, United Way, Eau Claire Community Foundation, University of Wisconsin, and Chippewa Valley Technical College. So it wasn't owned by any sector. That is really a significant contribution to civic renewal, shared ownership from the beginning. And then the planning process and visioning process, which was launched in partnership with the National Civic League, using both group meetings and small meetings, invited about 500 citizens to participate in an extended year-long process. It reflected the diversity of the community by gender, age, geographic location, race, employment, and income. The initiating committee made special efforts to recruit from low-income and minority ethnic groups, including meetings with members of the Hmong community African Americans and local trade unions. As Mike wrote about it for a Ford Foundation global meeting, which was amazed at the diversity when he described it. While the outcome was not perfect, it was an extremely diverse group of people. Moreover, it was honest participation. All of this builds civic muscle because it builds relationships, and then they followed a skill building process. The process was distinctive in several ways. It was highly diverse, it was citizen driven, it was respectful of knowledge of lay citizens in ways that are basically virtually unique. But it's what we need in the 21st century. In most public planning processes, quote, citizens provide input at designated time. In the Eau Claire process, citizens are actively involved in designing and conducting the process, determining the format and substance of recommendations, writing the report, and determining implementation strategies. That's the report for the Ford Foundation. I cannot stress how distinctive and important that approach is, that you actually take all sorts of different partners seriously in a planning process. And it's not only a planning process to then make a report to somebody who's supposed to act on it, but then say, we are responsible, in the words of the old civil rights song that I learned from Dorothy Cotton, my boss, we are the ones we've been waiting for. Nobody else is going to rescue us. We are the ones we've been waiting for. I think the mission of Clear Vision was really important, to engage our community for the common good. So that lifts the effort above any particular issue. So you act on it through issues, but always keeping in mind the question, is this contributing to a healthy community as a whole? There have been a lot of awards. Harvard's Innovations in American Government Awards awarded Clear Vision $10,000, pointing to the use of concepts like public work and a different understanding of power, not domination, but relational and collaborative, a different understanding of politics. And it noted that Clear Vision has had a sustained and remarkable process of building civic skills. Again, I cannot exaggerate how distinctive that is in the community field. It builds capacities across the community through practices like many of you heard, like one-on-one meetings, meeting with somebody to find out who they are and what they care about and what their passions are. So that's very different than the normal practice in voluntary associations or workplaces or anything else. Using power mapping, not who has the power and why do we don't have the power, but all the kind of power that might come to bear on an issue, like the Performance Center or the homeless shelter, or the public art across the city, or the public gardens, or the economic development. And finally, other practices like house meetings to get people's points of view, and a continuing process of reflection. Part of the problem of a hurry-up, technological, expert-driven society is that there are not many spaces for reflection, for asking what worked, what didn't, what can we learn from mistakes or setbacks. I cannot exaggerate how important a reflective process is and how rare it is in today's world. Just carving out space to say, well, what did we accomplish? What was the purpose? Mike Huggins, and I think you all have been in a course on this. You've been in the course? So you also probably learned some of these skills, right? Yeah. And you maybe have done coaches for other teams. Yeah. So Mike Huggins teaches a course through University of Eau Claire. When I interviewed Catherine Emanuel, who many of you know, I'm sure, who was a single mother when Eau Claire started, she said, one of the biggest things I learned was building my civic muscles. She remembers I was on food share and other kinds of assistance. I thought that people who influence a community are the people with titles or money. I discovered I didn't need that to make a difference. And it changed my life. And as you know, she really took off. She got a degree and then a master's degree and then went on city council and has been a really remarkable leader and is now the director of cooperative extension in this region. So there, she's also brought a civic muscle building approach to the work of extension. Now, this isn't a new idea. We've done a lot of work with extension, and I have a former student who is Scott Peters at Cornell now, who's the great historian of extension. And we know that extension in the 30s and 40s used to regularly practice the idea of building community capacity as its fundamental mission, not coming in and telling people what to do. So experts were on tap, not on top. But that's eroded dramatically in recent years as research universities have become more expert dominated and kind of ivory towers, and that's affected extension. But the interesting thing about Catherine's work in extension is that she's reviving the idea of extension as a way to help communities build capacity for problem solving. And she gives a lot of examples, some in extension and not, but one of the examples she gives was in the city council. So she sees public work as bringing many different kinds of people to the table. The city was faced with problems around drinking around the campus. Now this is a problem around the country, I can tell you. But instead of simply developing regulations, the city hosted meetings with the bar owner and the police and the students and the neighbors all at the same table. I would like to hear that, and that there had been conflict and tension. But the fact is, they asked about what are the facts, what is motivating us, what our self-interests are, why we are here, and what we're going to do. She says whether the outcome may be similar in terms of formal procedures, but it's very different when you have a broad base of citizens decide how to develop it. Vicki was a highly respected business leader as vice president of the Royal Credit Union, right here. Huge and important financial institution with $2.3 billion in assets, more than 180,000 members. In Vicki Haynes' view, clear vision has impacted the larger civic culture. At the time we began, our community blamed government. People said nothing happened because the government was too slow. And whether from clear vision or from the larger civic movement, she also described when I interviewed her that the practices of collaboration and listening have become part of the life of the Royal Credit Union. She gets to know communities when Royal is opening a new branch. Quote, everything I do, I say, how will this affect others? I listen more, I ask questions, I ask my staff, how do you work with other people? So that's building civic muscle. And it's also beginning to repair relationships, the civic fabric. But I want to return to the idea that it's also building a collective story, a public story. Public stories are public work. They're created by a part of a community, a diverse public, and they're a public wealth of a community, and they make a huge difference if they exist. Most communities in America, if you ask people, don't know what their public story is. They've lost a sense of who we are and where we're going. And that's a crisis. But I think Eau Claire is not only reviving a story of the community, but deepening it through involving new people and making it a more inclusive set of co-creators of the story and a more dynamic and open understanding of what a story is. So this, I was talking to Tom today, and he said, you can say if this is right or not in your view. He said, boy, the story of Eau Claire has changed in the last decade. There's a kind of buzz, there's an energy, there's a positive sense of possibility. That's really important, and it's really important to analyze the ingredients of that. So I want to conclude with a story that I think is like Eau Claire's, of a civic covenant. And it's a story of Nehemiah in the Bible. One of my favorite biblical stories. So Nehemiah was the Old Testament leader who got permission from the Persian emperor to go back in a period of kind of loosening of the reins of the empire and lead the people in the rebuilding of the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken in the diaspora. And the people were very demobilized and dispirited, and they didn't have a sense of common identity. And the leader before Nehemiah, Ezra, kept preaching to people that their morals were shot, and people ignored them. So it's an example that actually just preaching to people about their values doesn't really usually make too much difference. Nehemiah's story is very political. He scouted the terrain, he figured out what the obstacles would be, and then he called people to the work of rebuilding the city with this great call, come let us rebuild the walls so we will no longer suffer disgrace. And interestingly, as people did the work of rebuilding the walls, they rebuilt their story, their identity. I mean, there are a lot of, I'm not going to go into detail in the story. It's a really important biblical story that's full of lessons and organizing and politics and drama, and there's one point that nobles are trying to rip off the people, and so the people have to call a big assembly to hold them to account. They don't say, you're screwing the people. They say, this is interesting. They raise the justice issue, but in a different way. They say, we're collectively rebuilding the walls of our city, and you are selling people into slavery and abusing the poor, and this is undermining the possibilities of the whole community. So they make it a community-wide issue, not a segmented issue. So how I came about, how I learned about this was from a group in New York doing low-income housing. And I hear you're doing some low-income housing work. So I wanted to say what I learned. This was a group called East Brooklyn Churches in an African-American community in Brooklyn. They had done good organizing around issues like rotten meat in stores, a very low-income community. But they really thought to build a sense of community, they needed large numbers of low-income, single-unit houses that low-income working people could afford. And they got a plan from a builder, named I.D. Robbins, that actually if you could get land cheaply, and there was a lot of land that was potentially cheap in East Brooklyn, and you got loan resources from the city, you could build a lot of homes. They aimed at 5,000. But they were beset by what is kind of the industry of housing consultants and experts. There are thousands of housing consultants and experts in New York City. And one would say one thing, and another would say another thing, and they wouldn't know who to believe, and they were completely kind of going back and forth, and they were drifting. And then Johnny Ray Youngblood, who was a minister, Reverend Youngblood, gave a sermon series on the book of Nehemiah and how it was a really great story from the Bible of rebuilding a sense. And the community in the congregation started doing Nehemiah discussions, and they soon discovered that actually it was very much like their own challenge. They said, we're like the ancient story of Nehemiah in the Bible. And they called the project the Nehemiah Project. And I talked to both leaders and organizers and church people, and this is what they said. I mean, you might take a little bit of help from this. They said, naming it is about the Nehemiah's task of rebuilding our community, changed the whole project. It stopped being about housing. It started being about who we were as a community. And we stopped being tossed about by the latest expert to come through the door. We were much clearer about what we needed to know and why we needed to know it. So we put experts on tap, not on top. We stopped looking to experts to have the answers. The answers were coming in what we were trying to do. So that was significant. And then there was a political dimension that was significant. So there were several political dimensions. Naming it Nehemiah meant that all sorts of church bodies started pouring in money, including the Catholic Archdiocese, which gave a couple of $1 million, and the Lutherans gave several million, and so they got all sorts of support because it was called the Nehemiah Project. But they couldn't get Ed Koch, the mayor, to agree to open his loan fund. They had a city loan fund for low-income housing, and Koch didn't like the community organization because it had a fight with an affiliate in Queens about the expansion of LaGuardia Airport. So he just wouldn't meet with him. So the community leaders, the organizers, thought this was a terrible idea. Why are we doing this? It's too risky. The community leaders decided, we are going to announce to the world that we're going to build the Nehemiah homes. We're going to do the Nehemiah project. So they called a press conference. They were very good at getting press. They announced that they were going to do Nehemiah. The press said, well, what about the mayor? Youngblood said, well, you'll have to ask the mayor. We can't speak for him. But this is the power of a story amplified, a common story amplified. The CBS affiliate that night on the news, local news in the region of New York, had a story about the Nehemiah Homes project and the press conference and what they hoped. And the news showed block after block of burnt out buildings like Dresden after the bombing. And they read from the Bible the words of Nehemiah, come, let us rebuild the walls so we will no longer suffer disgrace. And as you might imagine, the audience went crazy. There was huge support all across the region. And of course, Ed Koch, the mayor, gets up the next day and declares that he is a new Nehemiah, and he and East Brooklyn churches are going to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem in East Brooklyn. But it went ahead. 5,000 units have in fact been built, and there have been, out of 5,000 low-income houses built, something like 2 forfeitures. I mean, the level of ownership and the impact of that rebuilding a sense of community is phenomenal. So it shows the power of public narratives when they're deep and rich, and I must say that I think the visioning process you're involved with is Clear Vision is a really promising way to, once again, kind of go out to the whole community and get a sense of who we are and where we're going to go. So I want to congratulate Eau Claire for birthing a civic movement with possibilities for helping to awaken democracy in America through a new civic covenant. Thank you. So do we have time for a little questions? Yeah.
Well, I don't know if you can answer that, or maybe Vicki can. I understand you're starting a new process of some public meetings, maybe February 21st. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there's several of us in the room that probably can, but as the Clear Vision Board of Directors sat back and looked at where we've been, we said it's been 10 years. We had a lot of great input from our community back in 2008 with a lot of projects that some came about, some didn't. It was time to step back and say, now where are we going to go? And we need to bring our citizens together again to say, where do you want us to go? So we started out with a survey that we sent out, and we had 314 people take the survey, which we thought was pretty good, just to help us identify some of the topics, not the issues, just the topics, just to springboard to get the conversation going. And then really what we're looking at doing is February 21st will be our kickoff. March 14th will be the second meeting. April 4th will be the third, and we're still working on the fourth date because we moved this all back a month because we had the bad weather last January 31st was supposed to be the first meeting. And what we're really hoping is that all of you that are interested come out. Listen, Dennis Donovan, that you had referenced, is going to be our facilitator for our first 2 meetings at least, to help us get started on understanding all of the tools, such as power mapping and one-on-ones and public work and self-interest, and just help everyone kind of get on that same page that you have a voice and you have an opportunity to make a difference, that we want our citizens, of this community to come out and help us problem solve once again, and even identify the problems. I mean, we're not doing, Clear Vision doesn't feel like we're the ones that do that. We're the ones that help to empower people to have a voice. Lance is our president right now of Clear Vision, so I don't know if you wanted to add something else.
Yeah, I would just add that, as an organization, we too struggle. I remember a year ago, we sat around a table and we thought, as a full board, where is Clear Vision going? And what do we were finishing up the Poverty Summit, and what do we need to do? Where is our community at? Where are we heading? And we had a really nice, frank discussion roughly about May of last year, and said, we need to go back to the roots, because the roots 10 years ago created the first vision, and it's been 10 years. We need to get back to those roots, find out what our vision should be for the next 10 years, and what it is the community identifies best with, and then work with individuals in the community to empower them to take that next step, continue to progress. So.
I think it would go back to some of the things Gary's talked about. We don't want to have silos built again in our community where this group is working on this and this group's working on it too, but they're not talking to each other. I think we want to break down those silos and again, get back that civic muscle, give people that opportunity to really engage and say, well, I see it this way, and that's good. And then Don says he sees it this way, and it's not to pick on each other, but talk about why you see it that way and why he sees it that way, and how then can we move forward. I think one of the things that Derek Okubo used to say to us when he was here from the National Civic League was, when you start solving a problem and you get to a point where you're not sure what you want to do, but you've come up with something, he reaches out and says, well, can we live with that? And if we can live with it, and you can live with it, and you can live with it, then let's go on. Let's do something, versus trying to get it down to be the absolute perfect solution, then we'll never get anything done. But if you can live with it, then let's go on, because it'll probably get better as you go. So that's what it's all about, is just bringing people together. We're meeting at the Pablo Center to start out, at least the first 3 meetings. We're not sure if the 4th one will be there, but just hopefully it's a comfortable place and a safe place for people to come and share what they think.
Now, were you responsible for the 2 poverty summits, the one that the artists and musicians did, and then the second one that was more centered on media and journalists? Did you have a part?
One was Beyond the Headlines, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that was yours.
And then I believe the artist one that you may be referring to, that was sometime in, that was late October, is that correct?
Yes, I think so.
So that one was benefiting Zero, which went to Beacon House and Western Dairyland's homeless shelters. And so that was to fund their loss of rapid rehousing.
So that wasn't part of Clear Vision plan, that was a separate thing.
It wasn't,
Well-
but what we look at is all of these things bubble out from people.
Yeah.
Well, Clear Vision didn't do it, but when the Humanities Council was looking for pilot communities, they looked at Eau Claire because of
Okay.
the Poverty Summit with Clear Vision. So again, it wasn't one of those things that Clear Vision did everything, but
Yeah.
they reached out because of that prior work on poverty.
Yeah.
They were looking at the media and stuff, but
Yeah, I
so
think
there was a connection.
it's like one of the most fruitful concepts in civic repair and civic muscle building is catalyst. So the catalyst is not something that is done by somebody, but something that springs for the energy and the encouragement and the hope from a center. And
I call it
it's also
inspiration.
the difference. It's a different kind of leadership. It's a difference. The Nehemiah leader. It's an interesting leader. The Nehemiah did not tell people to go do it. He said, "Let's do it." And he worked on the walls with the people, and he also kept bringing them back together because they tended to.
And I think that's an important piece of Clear Vision. I don't think any of us feel that Clear Vision does anything other than bring people together and have them work on it.
That's huge.
And we sit back and we think of our successes, but it's not like, well, it wasn't our successes. It was kind of the things that built out of the ashes that then people took and did. And we feel really proud that we brought people together. We taught them the tools. We empowered them to do it themselves. And
Yeah.
I was kind of involved in Clear Vision in the beginning when you guys all started. I'm a local educator, retired on school board. When you restarted to start this, what you're doing now, for me, there was some solace there because that's what you can provide for me as a community person. The fact that there is this vehicle that's always there that will gather people together, I find that to be a very powerful and a wonderful piece of our community that I've grown to kind of depend on. Like, I can feel those silos again, and I don't want them there because I think that we do that well when we do gather. But it's a hard thing to do. And as an educator, I would love to see our public schools and our students and our staff involved in this process much more than they have been in the past, because I think that is a real need for them to learn this as well. I feel that isolation at times, and I think that would be really powerful.
I mean, that's great. Let me just mention the book. Actually, it started out about our youth initiative in schools for civic education called Public Achievement in this low-income school in St. Paul that Dennis Donovan was the principal of. And through that and other work, we developed the idea of a citizen professional. Now, Vicki, I would say, is a citizen professional, and Mike is a citizen professional. But you can have citizen professionals of all kinds. In fact, in my experience in the civil rights movement, the beauticians were great citizen professionals. So this is how we define citizen professional. It's someone who has a skill, it's not based on credential, but it is someone who develops the vision and the skills to turn their work site or their larger community into a more humane and empowering and connected and inclusive environment. So that's a definition of citizen professional. So someone who does public work is a professional, but in the course of that, they transform their environment in humane ways, which I think is really powerful and appealing in a time when professionals like wage workers often feel like they're parts of a cog in a machine. But it also has tremendous catalytic potential, and it has enormous potential for schools. So the book has many stories of citizen teachers and citizen principals and citizen secretaries in schools and citizen parents who work with schools and citizen students in schools who really change the environment in schools. So I could not agree with you more. I think that's a real frontier.
Invite them to participate.
Go out and talk to people.
And I'm sure
I think
some are. I just think we could.
you could build on that. You can build on that. And Dennis is a great resource for that, by the way.
Well, and one of the things we did many, many years ago was we were invited by United Way to come and help them facilitate with their nonprofit organizations kind of this idea of how to work together and how to build power. I mean, we're happy, and we've got several of us that are happy to come to groups. If you could get a group together just to help them understand the power mapping and the one-on-ones and why it's so important to do those things, so that, again, you're not working in a silo. You've engaged all the people that have an interest in that topic, whether it's positive or negative, just so you can get multiple points of view, so that when you move forward, everyone agrees with what you're doing. Not everyone, but they can live with it.
And I would say one of the things there's a strong story in the book. When young people feel that they're producers, not simply consumers of their education in their communities, citizens today, not in waiting, they develop a different level of stake. So one of the stories in the book is about the northwestern region of Missouri, where a foundation, the Heartland Foundation, had supported public achievement in about a dozen schools for years, and with great success. All sorts of projects young people had done, and the schools and the teachers were involved. But then they decided, they had a huge problem in northwest Missouri about exodus of young people. 70% said they were going to leave. So they took the model of public work to scale. They created something called Empower U, and a kind of a university of teaching teachers and civic leaders. 20,000 young people went through it in several years, and they changed the regions, the attitudes of young people throughout the whole region, from 70% planning to leave to 70% planning to stay. And it's because they felt they had a stake in the community. In fact, we were thinking, just speculating, that because the woman who's head of the foundation, Judy Sabbert, is very enthusiastic about the stuff, and maybe we could figure out some exchange between northwestern Missouri and Eau Claire. I think they would have a lot to learn from what you've done, but you'd be interested in their work too. Yeah.
I would just add that I know Clear Vision has done a lot to begin to reestablish civic muscle, but I think, Claire, we're fortunate to have several groups that are using some of the same community organizing techniques to help people get more engaged in their community and to move the community forward with a combined vision. Jonah, Joanna Neighbors Advancing Hope, they send people off for training, they have task groups. Chris, you just had a training for people using a community organizer to teach people how to use their own narrative, their own story, to make and try to make an impact when there's an opportunity to testify about the budget, the state budget. I see lots of ripple effects.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
And so I think that's a real advantage.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think the synergy that can develop when you have different parts of the community beginning to work along parallel tracks and interacting around that is huge. That's another thing that makes Eau Claire really promising.
But the first time I had seen that happen was Clear Vision, years ago. That impacted on me a great deal.
Yeah.
We've lived in Eau Claire since 1971, my husband and I. And I haven't been really politically active, politically interested for sure, but I've really noticed the super involvement of the community and the different things that the community is doing. Jonah is just like a perfect example. Except that I am finding the silo effect more and more as the years go on recently. And a lot of it is because when you get these groups of task forces working on child poverty, housing poverty, whatever, injustices, it's a small core of people that are working and doing too much. It's overpowering with the scarcity of people that really are working on those things. And that gets to be hard after a while. So if there's some way that we could expand that interest to more of the community, I think that's what we need.
I mean, a couple of thoughts. One is the promising idea of citizen professional is that you're not asking people to do something in addition. You're thinking about how your work can be a vehicle for public improvement and humanization. So, I mean, it's not that that's easy in a lot of settings, but I think people want it. So I got to figure out how to do it. But actually, the organizing skills that Clear Vision is using in the community are organizing skills that are applicable to workplace settings too. And I would, in fact, I think one of the limits of the broad-based organizing, which I know well and I really appreciate it, work began by trying to translate the practices of broad-based groups, especially the Industrial Areas Foundation, into a nursing home and cooperative extension and the College of St. Catherine and working with Donovan in his school. But that's a different terrain. It's really distinctive. And the more I found out about Eau Claire, and this is actually something we'd like to find some support to do more research on, the more it became clear that the civic movement in Eau Claire has impacted institutional cultures in some cases. And that's a whole other frontier. It's beyond the idea that citizenship is somehow a voluntary after-hours thing. If there really develops a sustained civic revitalization in work roles and professions, in schools and teachers' identities, and nurses and health institutions and higher education like University of Eau Claire, that would have huge impact, because that's what people are looking for, all of the zero crisis of work. Okay, well, thank you all. It's great. I wish you well, and I want to keep coming back here because I want to write about Eau Claire. I want to study Eau Claire more.
And
the book is available, and the author has a pen to sign. We should spend some time here for talk.